Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Blog Series. It's Friday, June 5th, 2026, and I thought I'd offer up another installment under the Thoughts and Reflections sub-series. And I want to talk about losing a parent. Most of us will lose one or both of our parents in our lifetimes. Some parents outlive one or more of their children, obviously, due to accidents or illnesses or other tragedies. Thankfully, that's much rarer than the other way around. Instead, the census data suggest that if you happen to live to be about my age, for example, then somewhere in your mid-60s, or at least by the age of 65, somewhere close to 90% of us will have had to bury at least one of our parents, and more than half will have lost both parents, as in my case. So have you ever lost a parent? Either biological, a step-parent, or parent of any kind? I lost my father when I was 26, so that was relatively early compared to most of my cohort. I was the first one in my friendship group to lose a parent. It wasn't quite as shocking as it might have been, mainly because we had lost other childhood friends before any of us lost a parent. But that's another story for another day. Instead, I remember vividly losing my father, I suppose mainly because I was talking to him on the phone when he died of a heart attack back on November 20th, 1988. And that was, by the way, his second such attack. Interestingly, 7 years earlier, I was living with him when he had his first heart attack, and I actually drove him to the hospital. He ended up having a double bypass operation and again lived for another 7 years. But by then, in 1988, as I mentioned, I was actually talking to him on the phone when he stopped talking, and I could hear that he was struggling. So I've told this story before. I knew something was wrong. I told my dad I was going to contact the neighbor to come check on him, etc. He mumbled something like, "Yeah, okay," and we hung up. By the time his neighbor and best friend had arrived, not more than 10 minutes later, he was already gone. So I described our final encounter in my song titled The Old Man and the Sea, or The Old Man by the Sea, I should say, which I've left a link in the description below if you'd like to hear that one. My mother and father had split up actually 10 years before then, back in 78. But after my father died, my mother then went on to live another 36 years. So her passing in 2024 then was completely different than my father's and a completely different experience. So she was in her mid-90s at that time, and she'd been in decline, quite frankly, in terms of her health and cognitively for the last 5 years or so. She was in an assisted living facility, and while she still knew our names and she could carry on conversations on a good day, she suffered some early signs of dementia, cognitive impairment of various kinds. She didn't have Alzheimer's, but she was definitely on the decline. But she still had a certain awareness too, as she would sometimes laugh at herself, at her own limitations, almost in a self-mocking sort of way. And she would describe herself on many occasions as, quote, the village idiot. I'd say, "How are you, Mom?" And she'd smile and say, "Oh, well, I'm fine, but I'm feeling like the village idiot these days. I can't remember anything," and so on. And so she would laugh along, and I'd respond something like, "Well, Mom, welcome to my world. I know exactly how you feel." So that was our typical exchange. But she also sometimes, again, took it a step further in a kind of a self-deprecating fashion. She'd sometimes follow up with this kind of a self-assessment. She'd say, well, what, why am I here? What good am I doing? Why don't you all just tie me to a raft and send me out to the ocean? I'm not kidding. So that's the kind of thing she would say. And then I'd occasionally reply something, "Well, if that's the plan, then I'm going to join you and we'll sail out to sea together." And she'd say something then like, "Well, heavens no, you're a young man." So she still had a sense of humor, a practical side, if you will, right up until the end. But I'd also like to point out the obvious, right? So as we approach the end of our lives, we all need someone to take care of us. Since I happen to live in Canada, I couldn't look after my mother, who lived in Virginia. But my sisters, Lisa and Tricia, were and are the two angels who looked after our mother so lovingly in her final years, even though, again, she was in an assisted living facility. And a third angel was her caregiver from outside of the family, a young woman by the name of Daniela. So the team of Lisa, Tricia, and Daniela ended up being just kind of the perfect combination of caregivers. Honestly, I couldn't have asked for a more loving environment as our mother approached the end of her life. And by early February 2024, we knew the time was near. So several of us made a final visit to see her at that time, including many of her grandchildren. That was delightful. She was delighted to see them all. And then I thought I'd come back down again in a couple of months, but my sister texted me that she wasn't sure how much longer Mom had left to live. So I came back a bit sooner for another visit, played some guitar for her, including some of her favorite songs, such as Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Some of you will know that one, The Wizard of Oz. She could sing that song beautifully, not perhaps quite as well as Judy Garland, but my mother could definitely sing. She could carry a tune. And in any event, as I say, we had a nice time together, and I knew she was definitely near the end. So back in London, Ontario, my sister then called me on Sunday morning on February 25th, 2024. And she said she didn't think Mom had much longer to go. Now, I'd written a song about her, or about the story of her entire life, that I sang to her on my last visit, titled simply 19 and 29. That was her birth year. I explained, though, that I hadn't finished the song yet because she still was here. She had longer to live, and I couldn't finish it as long as she was alive, and she laughed at that. But my sister then called me again on that Sunday morning, and I decided I needed to finish the song. And since the song was written from an autobiographical perspective, this perspective of my mother, I imagined what she might like to say at the end of her life. And so these are the words that came to me that morning. I've lived almost 100 years with endless laughter, with joy and tears. The village idiot I am these days, I'd like a raft just to float away. And then finally, these are the last 8 lines that I wrote, trying to channel my mother's spirit, her energy, even her philosophy, if you will, what she deeply believed in. And so these are the final words of her song, and the final words then of my debut album, 62 Since 62. And so here's what I think, or thought she would say as her final words. Think of me and say a prayer. In your heart with love to share, smiling down from beyond the blue. You know I'm always there for you. Come what may, our world lives on. Think of me, remember me when you hear this song. Laugh and sing, my beautiful birds. I love you all are my final words. So again, I imagine these to be my mother's final words, and as I say, they're the final words on my album. But I just want to mention 2 other quick things about my mother's passing that I hope will inspire anyone who might be watching or listening. So first, on that Sunday evening, February 25th, my sister set it up so that we could FaceTime and see each other one more time. So my mother was not really conscious as my sister sat there holding her hand, or so it seemed, with her eyes closed. So Lisa asked her, Mom, do you want to hear Joe sing the song that he wrote about you? And somewhat to her surprise, my mother squeezed her hand, a signal for yes. So I played the entire finished song on that Sunday evening. And, she sat there again. Her eyes were closed the entire time. And, we weren't sure what she was taking in, but my sister asked her, Mom, did you like the song, after I finished? And she squeezed her hand again, even harder. She never opened her eyes, but she was definitely still there. And so here's the final thing. Lisa sensed that the end was near, and after we hung up, she decided to stay there and continue holding our mother's hand. And she actually did that for the next, in the quiet, just her and my mother. And she stayed there for the next kind of 3 to 4 hours or so. And I guess somewhere between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on Monday morning, February 26th, my mother passed on, with my sister still holding her hand. I hope that everyone has someone there by their side to hold their hand or give them a hug, especially at the end of life. How blessed and lucky we were to have had our mother and to have had sisters like Lisa and Tricia who were there for her right up until the end and beyond, quite frankly. And how blessed am I to have been able to play her song and for her to squeeze my sister's hand to express her appreciation. What a gift she returned. So I know it's trite to say, but seriously, don't take your loved ones for granted, or people in general, for that matter. I think if we spend more time holding people's hands and giving them hugs, we'll certainly be making the world a happier and a more loving place. And dare I say, we're probably going to keep moving more quickly further along on that path toward enlightenment. I've learned that you can laugh and sing not just with your aging parents or with your children, but with whomever you might encounter along the way in your life's journey. I know it's hard sometimes, and with some people, to be sure. But let's keep trying, and not just when our parents are at the end stages of their lives or passed to the other side. So as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. We'll see you next time.